Hello and welcome to the Surface Water Availability presentation. This presentation was prepared for the Administrative Law Judge training on December 17th, 2021, but serves as a general introduction to surface water availability within the Water Resources Department. My name is Rachel Lovellford. I am the manager for the Surface Water section. I am joined in this presentation by Jordan Beamer, the Water Availability Program Coordinator, Ryan Andrews, a hydrologist within the Surface Water Program, and Melanie Hoskinson, the Water Availability Analyst. The Surface Water Hydrology section provides technical expertise for the department and the public regarding surface water, consumptive use, and water diversion data, including the measurement, modeling, analysis, and interpretation of this information. Through coordination with others in the agency, the section provides data and analyses critical for responsible water management by addressing topics like water allocation, regulation, distribution, streamflow and drought planning, climate and land use changes, streamflow forecasting, and other project or water rights specific analyses. In today's presentation, we will be giving a general overview of the science of hydrology, including the field itself of hydrology. We will be presenting the section's role in applying these principles of hydrologic science, including standards and references. We will provide a background on the history and development of the Water Availability Program, provide an overview of methodology for estimating water availability and how those methods relate to the principles of the field, and describe natural streamflow estimates and why in-stream water rights are evaluated at the 50% exceedance level. Hydrology. The field of hydrology itself is the study of the distribution and movement of water above and below the Earth's surface. This includes interactions between water and the environment, otherwise known as the water cycle. In Oregon, we get a great deal of our precipitation in the form of rain and snow, with that water percolating into the ground and entering groundwater aquifers, entering the soil profile and being used by plants through transpiration, or water running off from soil into our rivers and streams and potentially into lakes where water is either evaporated off into the atmosphere or flows down to its terminus, either in the ocean or another water body. So what does a surface water hydrologist do? These are scientists that use measurement and modeling in the integration of earth science, engineering, and statistics to study and solve water-related issues such as quantity, quality, and availability. In Oregon, even before the department was founded and even the state, we've been making measurements of stream flow in close collaboration with the United States Geologic Survey across the state. Stream flow measurement using flow meters and gauges provides foundational data for understanding how much water is present in a stream. Although there are many aspects of the water cycle that can be measured, there are many that cannot, or that cannot be feasibly measured in whole. In those cases, modeling is a really critical tool in the field of hydrology, allowing hydrologists to rely on physical and statistical relationships between processes in the water cycle, which are often informed or calibrated with measurement data. In the department, we rely on multiple sources to establish and understand best practices, including the United States Geologic Survey, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, United States Army Corps of Engineers, and professional organizations like the American Water Resources Association and their associated peer-reviewed publications. So what is water availability? Water availability is both a physical and a management concept. Fundamentally, it is assessed by understanding the physical distribution of water across the landscape, including who is using that water, when and where. Water availability as a management concept reflects the interpretation of the physical water availability into a standard that can be applied for water management. Water management concept of water availability, again, relies heavily on the physical determinations of water supply and water use. These determinations are especially important in a state like Oregon, where this finite resource of water is available at different places and different times across the state, depending on a number of factors. One really important factor for visualizing this variation is the average annual precipitation. In this map here, you can see the average annual precipitation from 1981 to 2010 across the state. Note that on the coast of Oregon, we may receive more than 160 inches of precip in some, on average in some areas, whereas on the east side, there are locations where we receive less than 10 inches of rain annually. This is especially evident then in our streams across the state, and when compared with the demand for water, underscores the importance of understanding both, again, available water supply and the need and timing of water for different consumptive uses across the state. In the top graph, we have an example of a rain-dominated system showing on the y-axis the percent of annual precipitation or demand, and on the x-axis the month of the year. You can see in this example that the stream flow distribution peaks in the wintertime and is at a low in the summer, consistent with when the peak in demand occurs. In our snowmelt-dominated systems, in this bottom graph, you can see that there is some better alignment between the peak crop demand and peak streamflow distribution. However, the mismatch in timing still there presents many challenges for water allocation and regulation. We share this with you because it underscores the importance of understanding the concept of water availability watershed by watershed across the state. Surface water is used for a variety of purposes across Oregon, including municipal drinking water, irrigation for agriculture, in-stream flows, and industrial water use. Again, underscoring the variety of considerations that need to be taken into account when determining the demand for water relative to water availability. OWRD's role and responsibility in water management is to implement and enforce Oregon's water allocation and distribution laws. We manage surface water resources to meet in-stream and out-of-stream uses and collect, manage, and analyze water data. This is all to support the prior appropriation doctrine, which is the priority date system used within the state of Oregon. In times of shortage, typically in the summer, the junior water user gets shut off in many basins so that a senior water user can get and access water. As more water rights are handed out within a basin and those uses increase, these shortages occur more often, resulting in more frequent regulation. An important task for OWRD is to ensure existing water users' access to surface water happens a reasonable amount of time, and to determine and track if surface water is available for new appropriation based on the amount of use within a basin. The surface water section supports this work along with other sections of the agency through a variety of actions. The three key functions are our collection of streamflow data through streamflow measurement and gauging stations, the publication and production of this data through our hydrographics group, and then the interpretation and application of this data to our different modeling efforts, including the water availability model. I want to emphasize at this point that for all of our streamflow data collection, we follow standards established by the United States Geologic Survey. We operate over 200 stream gauges across the state of Oregon and rely on numerous other partners to help us collect pertinent data used for water availability modeling. These data, again, critical for understanding variation in water supply and use, provide the backbone of the analysis that we will discuss more today. One important piece of the story of water allocation to understand is that the department's governing policies have shifted over time. Before statehood, so pre-1909, water was appropriated to meet societal goals generally, and Native Americans were often the first appropriators for agriculture. In 1909, the state established the prior appropriation doctrine in Oregon, with the requirements that any water used was put to beneficial use, and those water users that established use first in time held the first right in time as well. The state began limiting appropriation of streams in the 1950s with the state engineer, then the precursor to the Water Resources Department, withdrew streams which appeared to be fully appropriated based on regulatory actions. The Water Resources Board at that time created certain basin protections to support the state engineer's assessments, and at that point also recognized the need for stream flows in stream for fish and wildlife and established minimum perennial stream flows. The next point in time that the department updated or shifted its approach to surface water appropriation was in the 1980s when the Instream Water Rights Act passed the legislature. At that point in time, or shortly after, the state was directed to establish a water availability program in line with the then new water allocation policy. The goal of that policy was to define water availability and over appropriation for in-stream and out-of-stream uses. And that is the policy that is in place today. That policy directly led to the creation of the Water Availability Program. And on that note, I am going to hand the presentation over to Jordan Beamer.
Thanks, Rachel. So my name is Jordan Beamer. I'm a Water Availability Program Coordinator and Hydrologist at OWRD, and providing a little bit of an overview of the Water Availability Program. The Water Availability Program is an important part of the agency's mission to address Oregon's water supply needs. It is an essential database and web page that's used frequently in the review of water right applications and in the basin planning process. all applicants for surface water rights and a growing number of groundwater right applicants are affected by these water availability determinations. And water availability is also used to evaluate in-stream water rights in scenic waterway flows. Next slide. So in 1989, the state legislature directed the department to set standards for evaluating whether water is available for in-stream and out-of-stream appropriations from live flow. And live flow is also known as natural stream flow, which is stream flow that arises from natural hydrologic processes. We were also directed to establish and maintain an operational database and then use that database to evaluate applications for new uses of surface water. So as Rachel mentioned earlier, one of the purposes was to limit new appropriations such that applicants could expect water a reasonable amount of time. And then another intent was to limit situations of regulation by field staff for OWRD. Next slide. So in 1992, the water allocation policy was adopted, and this policy is largely based on for surface water, the over-appropriation definition, which means the quantity of surface water available during a specified period is not sufficient to meet the expected demands from all water rights at least 80% of the time during that period. So this is a key point, which essentially means that any usable surface water in a watershed is the flow rate that's available most of the time. Say a flow rate in a stream that's exceeded 80% of the time, or 8 out of 10 years. And the standards for this were applied to new permit applications that are submitted after July 17th, 1992. Next slide. So the water allocation really provides the basis for calculating water availability based on the over-appropriation. It's intended to allocate water among a broad range of beneficial uses, including environmental uses, economic uses, and providing social benefits. By definition, this policy doesn't innately protect in-stream values, and what that means is a stream that doesn't have an in-stream water right to retain water in stream could expect periods of no flow 20% of the time at full appropriation, which isn't good for aquatic ecosystems. Next slide. So this water availability reporting system, which is essentially this operational database, was developed and put into operational use in the mid-1990s. And this is thanks in large part to OWRD hydrologists Rick Cooper and Ken Starr. The water availability models and database were developed to estimate water availability consistently statewide using a broad brush statewide approach that was data driven and statistically based. And this shows the title page of an open file report authored by Rick Cooper, published in 1992, which titled Determining Surface Water Availability in Oregon, which is the primary reference for the water availability reporting system. Next slide. So some of the standards that were developed in the early 1990s define water availability based on a surface water accounting equation where existing uses, which are legal uses of water, for example, in-stream or out-of-stream uses, are subtracted from the natural stream flow, where natural stream flow is stream flow unaffected by upstream regulation. And this calculation was to be done on a monthly basis, watershed by watershed. So both watersheds where there's a gauging station, like shown in the picture below, or in areas where we don't have gauges, which we call ungauged watersheds. So in hydrology, the tool that is used to assess the time varying stream flow in a system is called the flow duration curve. And Ryan will explain this in a little bit more detail later on, but it's essentially you develop a relationship between the flow rate that's measured at a gauge and then the fraction of time that flow is equaled or exceeded. So in the water availability reporting system, natural flow is estimated at two of these exceedance levels. And the first one is the 80% exceedance level. So this is the stream flow for a particular period of time that the flow rate is exceeded 80% of the time. And this is typically what is used for, based on the over-appropriation definition. We also calculate natural flow at the 50% exceedance level. So this is the stream flow exceeded 50% of the time. Ryan will spend a little bit more time later in the presentation laying out the process for estimating natural flow. Next slide. So breaking down the debits in our water availability calculation, where we have the water availability is equal to the natural stream flow minus storage, which is from reservoirs and storage rights. And so in the calculation for storage, we're estimating all of the storage rights above a certain point, that's contained within a watershed. For the out of stream uses, this is also a cumulative number. So the total out of stream water rights for all out of stream water rights in a watershed are added up. For in streams, which we're also debiting out, this is actually the maximum value for that point on the stream within that watershed. So we're not totaling all the in streams for above a watershed. And so once we put all of that information together and do the calculation, we come up with a water availability number, and a positive water availability number that generally means that there's water available in that watershed. And we use a sophisticated suite of models that computes the amount of surface water availability in this equation. Next slide. So in addition to how the different uses are totaled up in our calculation, some of the existing uses are debited as the full amount of the water rights. So for example, for reservoir storage and for in-stream uses, we subtract out the full amount. For out-of-stream uses, such as irrigation, the expected demand is the consumptive portion of that use, so the consumptive use. The consumptive use are losses due to evaporation and transpiration of water that's applied and used, which cause it and that don't return back to the watershed. So we can think of this as an example when water is diverted and applied somewhere, for example, your lawn, some of that water is lost to evaporation and transpiration, whereas some of it runs back into the stream or percolates down into the soil profile, and stays within the watershed. Next slide. Where is water availability calculated? So ideally, we'd be able to calculate water availability at every single point on a stream across all streams in the state, but practically we have this water availability calculated for approximately 2,300 watersheds throughout the state, and we refer to these as water availability basins. And these basins were originally delineated back in around the same time, the early 1990s, based on locations of specific stream gauging stations, which were generally USGS or OWRD gauging stations with a long stream flow record and exceedance flows that were calculated based on measurements. And the remaining locations, such as Instream water right locations, mouths of significant tributaries, these are generally ungauged, so which mean that there's no measured stream flow at these locations, and so the exceedant stream flows were estimated using statistical modeling. Next slide. An important concept of how water availability is assessed is also the consideration of nested watersheds. So although we might have a positive water availability calculation in a watershed, individual watershed, in order for water to be available, we need to consider limiting watersheds. And so it must be available at all points downstream. And so the basic takeaway here is if water is not available at the mouth of a stream, it will not be available at the upstream watersheds. Next slide. So this map is a current snapshot of water availability. It's a map that's generated from information in the WARS database. So we now have a picture of water availability for most of the watersheds, surface water watersheds in the state. And so for this one shows the available stream flow for the month of January at the 50% exceedance level. And we can kind of relate to this with what Rachel talked about earlier in the showing the stream flow hydrograph versus the demands. In January, especially in Western Oregon, we generally have high stream flows, a lot of rainfall runoff. We have very low demand, so we're not irrigating crops. We're not needing to use a lot of water, and so because of that, we have high available stream flow. We'll also notice that in some of the basins, particularly on the east of the Cascades, there's no water available even in the winter, and this is shown by the tan colors. And a lot of these basins have large storage facilities, so water's being used essentially to fill large storage reservoirs, or we have high winter demands for municipal supplies and that kind of thing. Next slide. So we contrast the January map with a map of water available at the 80% exceedance level for the month of August. So this is during the summer months, and in Oregon, we generally have dry conditions, low stream flows, and this is also when we have high water demand, particularly from irrigation, large irrigation diversions, for surface water, high relative out of stream uses, and we also have in-stream demands that are accounted for. So generally, there's no surface water available at the 80% exceedance level for most watersheds across the state, except a few places like the main stem Willamette River and some remote coastal watersheds in Northeast Oregon. Excited? So I'll finish off providing a flow chart that describes the process that we use to compute water availability for the watersheds in Oregon. So data is pulled from multiple OWRD databases, which are shown in black, such as the hydrographics database of stream flow and water rights information and GIS information. That data is processed through OWRD tools and programs, which are shown in the green, to calculate natural stream flow and different components. And then these programs populate the WARS tables, so the database, which are shown in the red. We're currently using the same methods and data sources as when WARS was originally developed, although many of the programs have been updated to more modern programming languages and database structures so that we can be consistent with the rest of the agency and also provide the data in online tools. So the process that's used to generate the Natural Streamflow database, the WABS Streamflow database, will be covered next by Ryan, and then Melanie will wrap up discussing the Instream demands and then this water availability calculation that generates the water availability database and updates it. So next slide, I'll pass it off to Ryan.
Thanks, Jordan. Since natural stream flow is such an important concept as it relates to water availability in the water availability standards and the water allocation policy, we should define it a little further. So what is natural stream flow? Natural stream flow is considered stream flow that arises from natural hydrologic processes. And not only that, it's important to remember that we're also considering the physical condition of the watershed. So ideally, natural stream flow would it originates in physically unaltered watersheds as well. So we intend natural stream flow to represent pre-development stream flows, and so this is stream flow that is unaffected by consumptive use or reservoir storage or stream flows prior to any sort of regulation. It's also important to point out that there are very few places in Oregon and elsewhere that are actually measuring and have natural stream flow. Next slide, please. So why is natural stream flow so important to the concept of water availability? Well, natural stream flow provides a reference point for calculating the surface water supply for allocation. And it also provides a basis from which the in-stream water rights that we're going to talk about are from which they're evaluated. So it's important to establish this expected condition, we'll call it, of the stream operating without human influences. From this expected condition, then we can factor in those expected demands that ultimately leads us to water availability. And it's also important because it allows for estimation in situations where measurements are unavailable. And so it's really important concept, not only for defining water availability, but for meeting assumptions that are critical to proper modeling, which we'll discuss in a little bit. Next slide, please. So how do we quantify this stream flow? So Jordan hinted at it a little bit earlier regarding a flow duration curve, but as it relates to water availability, we need to reliably estimate how often a rate of stream flow is present in a stream under natural conditions in both gauged and ungauged watersheds, or those water availability basins that Jordan mentioned earlier. So we need to specify a quantity to represent that rate of stream flow as it is based on, as it relates to rule and statute. So what we rely on is a tool called a flow duration curve that shows the percentage of time a given rate of stream flow or discharge was present or exceeded during a specific period of time. So that tool, the flow duration curve tool, produces a product called an exceedance flow, which indicates how often a specified discharge or rate of stream flow is present in a stream. So those flow values correspond to a given percentage of time. So this is useful for calculating water availability because it provides a specific quantity as it's defined by rule and statute. So, so those exceedance flows, it's important to note that those must be calculated to represent the same long period of time to account for natural variability of stream flow. And so what this means and what this refers to is using the same period of time, for example, 1958 to 1987, using the data collected during that specific period of time for each gauged watershed. And this is referred to as a base period. And what this does, it ideally captures a range of wet and dry periods to capture that and account for that natural variability of stream flow. And so it's important to consider this time frame of data that we use to calculate the flow duration curve. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's important here in a second. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a flow duration curve calculation, and this is taken from our department document determining surface water availability in Oregon. And so if we see here, we have a table on the right that has some data in it and chronologically ordered in columns 1 and 2. So flow duration curves are calculated, one, using mean daily flow records collected at gauging stations throughout the state. And we calculate these on a monthly basis, given what we saw earlier about how stream flow varies by month throughout the year and depending on where you are in the state. So column 2 shows the flows as they occurred in time. So days 1 through 11 have a range of discharges. But in the next third and fourth column, we rearrange those flows from smallest to largest. And this is an important step in calculating flow duration curve. So column 5 shows the percent exceedance associated with those stream flows. So we can see at the top discharge of 106, for example, the amount that's exceeded, so that flow is exceeded or equaled 100% of the time. And then as we increase the magnitude of discharge, that the amount of time that those flows are exceeded decreases. So for example, the discharge of 302 was exceeded 0% of the time. And so this is just a quick example of a quick and simple example of how a flow duration curve can be calculated. And so these the percent exceedances in that last column, the 5th column, so the 50% exceedance flow and the 80% exceedance flow are specifically quantified, and those relate to the quantities that we're defining in water availability. Next slide, please. So this next slide, this is a graphical representation and is this similar information just graphically represented to show what this looks like in a sort of a graphical representation. And so this is just a summarization of the concepts that were presented previously. So again, you can see that on the bottom, on the x-axis, we show the percentage of time that the flow is equaled or exceeded, and the discharge is on the y-axis on the left-hand side. And so just again, you can see that the greater the discharge, the less of that time percentage of time that flow is equaled or exceeded, and then as you decrease that flow is present or exceeded more often. So we can see that, again, this provides a practical basis for implementing the standards of over-appropriation. So as was mentioned earlier, over-appropriation is related to the 80% exceedance flow. So we can see that is approximately 100 CFS. So we're able to specify a value that relates exactly to the water availability standards. And then we can do the same for that 50% exceedance flow, and those are related to our in-stream water rights, as we'll discuss a little later on. Next slide, please. So we hinted at this a little bit earlier, but we have two different types of watersheds that we need to calculate natural stream flow for. So we have the gauged watersheds, and on the left you see a little bit of information about how those are calculated for gauged watersheds. So we mentioned that these are watersheds where we have a stream gauge that collects data and records it on a continuous basis for a given period of record. So natural stream flow is calculated using those measured stream flows. Ideally, these are unaffected by storage, but as was mentioned earlier, there's very few places in Oregon and elsewhere where your gauge is actually measuring natural stream flow. So it's not being affected by storage or diversions or consumptive use upstream in the watershed. So we can calculate our flow duration curve directly using that gauge stream flow data. But it's important to note, since many of our gauges are actually affected by consumptive use, we do need to account for those consumptive uses. So what we do is we correct those gauge stream flows to natural stream flow by performing add backs of that consumptive use. So that's another part of the process, is quantifying that consumptive use. But once we do that, we correct natural flow by adding that back to gauge stream flow. However, we have a much greater proportion of ungauged watersheds compared to the gauged watersheds. So how do we calculate natural stream flow in these ungauged watersheds that lack or have a limited amount of data? Well, we use a statistical approach that estimates natural stream flow using regional regression analysis. So regional regression analysis, in our case, establishes a relationship between stream flow in gauged watersheds and those gauged watershed characteristics. So if you look down in the bottom right-hand corner, we have an example of what this equation looks like. So on the left-hand side, before the equal sign, we have Q NSF, and this represents the natural stream flow at a given exceedance, at a given exceedance percentage. Now on the right-hand side of that equation, we have a set of variables and coefficients that we use that relate the watershed characteristics to the stream flow. So for example, the A represents watershed area, so the size of that watershed. S is the slope, AS is the aspect, and E is the elevation. So these are just some examples of the several watershed characteristics that are included in these equations. So what we would do is we would, for example, take a watershed, delineate it, and extract the watershed characteristics such as the area and slope. And for that gauged watershed, we would relate those characteristics to that exceedance flow value. And this gives us a relationship that we can then use So for an ungauged watershed, for example, we would delineate that watershed, extract the characteristics from those, and although we don't have flow values directly measured for that watershed, we can plug in those characteristics into this equation down here, and it would give us a value that corresponds to the exceedance flow for that watershed. And so this is just a statistical model that we use to extrapolate the information from our gauged watersheds to our ungauged watersheds. And this allows for us to quantify stream flow on a statewide scale, where we have situations of relatively limited data. And this is a standard approach that is used by other federal and state agencies that is reliable for estimating flows in ungauged locations. So it's a industry standard that's been developed over quite some research and time. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the concept of a base period earlier and why it's important to consider when you're developing estimates of stream flow. We have an example on the right-hand side in Table 4 from that same publication that compares the 50% exceedance flows for two 10-year periods for a gauge on the John Day River. So exceedance flows can vary depending on the time period used to calculate the exceedance flows. So we see the 12 months out of the year in the right-hand table. In the first column, we have flows from the period 1926 to 1935, and in the third column, flows from 1951 to 1960. The last column shows the percent difference between these two base periods in their 50% exceedance flows. So it's important to note how different these flows can be. So for example, in January, that second base period, or 1951 to 1960, the 50% exceedance flow is over twice as high as the initial base period. And so this is a good example of how variable the stream flow can be between two different periods of time. And this is only a 10-year period. So as we mentioned earlier, I believe we try to use a 30-year period of record to account for this variability. So we want a long-term period of records that captures a range of wet and dry periods to be able to more accurately represent stream flow and capture that variability over a long period of time. Next slide, please. As we saw, it's important to consider the period of time that we use to for the data that we use. So we used a 10-year period in that example before, but we typically rely upon a 30-year period of record to capture that variability. And this is a standard set by other organizations, including the World Meteorological Organization. And we're often constrained by the availability of stream flow records. And what this means is gauges can operate for any given period of time, depending on their location and the quality of data that they're collecting. It might take a while to realize that data might be not as high quality due to a variety of reasons. For example, it's not capturing flood flows as accurately as it's desired. For example, so we have a number of stream flow of gauging stations throughout the history of the department, and even further, the number of those that are collecting data over a 30-year period record is even smaller. So we're constrained by the availability of stream flow records. And additionally, we need to capture stream flow throughout the state. And so it's important to consider the spatial distribution of these gauges. So we attempt to maximize the number of gauges first, and then maximize the number of years that those gauges are operating. So we have two different types of gauges that we consider in our analysis. We have index gauges, which are considered to have collected continuous records throughout the entire 30-year base period. So these gauges are operating throughout that entire 30-year time period. We also have short record gauges, and these are used to represent all other periods of record, and this can include periods outside that 30-year period of record or within that 30-year period of record. So we use these short record gauges to bolster the amount of information that we have to conduct our analysis. So we put a lot of work into maximizing this data by figuring out a way to incorporate these gauges that have less than 30-year period of record. And this increases the amount of information that we have to improve our estimates of water availability. Next slide, please. To summarize the natural streamflow concept and to lead us into our next discussion about how this relates to the in-stream water right evaluation and process. Natural streamflow estimates are based on long-term streamflow data and the use of geostatistical methods to transfer that gauged information to ungauged watersheds throughout the state. Natural streamflow is an important basis for calculating water availability on a statewide scale. And you can see in this graphic, we have that concept of flow duration curves. It's just represented a little differently here, where we have the 80% exceedance flow in the yellow and the 50% exceedance flow in the black. And these are for a gauging station and represented by month. So you can see the different magnitudes of stream flow and the exceedance flows and how they vary by month. So it looks a little similar to that graphic of stream flow earlier, where it depends on your location in the state and what time of the year you're looking at. And finally, so for evaluating in-stream water rights, we evaluate those at the 50% exceedance flow. And we'll transition to Melanie to talk a little bit about our process for evaluating our in-stream water rights. Melanie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Ryan. The in-stream water rights division 77 states that the amount of water allowed for an in-stream water right shall not exceed the estimated natural stream flow for a watershed. This means that out-of-stream uses shall not factor into determining the amount for the in-stream water right. The take-home message is that OWRD evaluates an in-stream water right based on natural stream flow, not water availability. Next slide. This map shows both gauging stations, the red and blue dots, as well as the in-stream water rights in Oregon, shown in green. Stream gauges located on reaches that contain a current in-stream water right play an important role in administering in-stream water rights. Also, the data from stream gauges are used in the review of new in-stream water right applications. Next slide. Thank you. When an in-stream water right is submitted to the department, the water rights staff submits a request for natural streamflow estimates from the water availability team. These are the steps that are taken to develop natural streamflow estimates. And I'll go into more detail on each of these in the next few slides. First, we delineate the watershed and generate watershed characteristics. We then estimate natural streamflow for the watershed and compare that to the applied for in-stream flow amount. Once those are reconciled, we then enter the data into the water availability system. Next slide. This map shows a small upstream watershed in blue embedded within a larger watershed which already has natural streamflow estimates. When a new application for an in-stream water right comes in the door, we have to generate new estimates specifically for the area of interest. To do this, we first delineate or map the watershed of interest using a mapping tool where we identify the downstream point of interest of the watershed, and then the tool delineates the watershed based on the topography of the area. Next slide. The second step in the process is to generate data about that watershed. To do this, we run our Watershed's Characteristics tool to compute the required watershed characteristics for estimating stream flows. Important characteristics related to the watershed include the downstream latitude and longitude of the watershed, the area and miles of stream within the watershed, mean annual precipitation and temperature, elevation, slope, and relief. Basically, all of the characteristics which are important to help determine streamflow amounts. There are over 90 different characteristics which are used. Next slide. Using the watershed characteristics and the process that Ryan explained in detail previously, we are able to determine the estimated natural streamflow by month. Next slide. We then overlay the amount of water requested by the applicant for the in-stream water right and compare the values by month. Next slide. For our final determination of how much water will be allowed for the in-stream water right, we limit the allowed amount to the minimum of either the 50% exceedance value or the requested amount. As you can see in the month of April, the applicant requested about 26 CFS of water for the in-stream water right. However, OWRD's natural streamflow estimate shows that only about 23 CFS will be in the stream, and so we limit the request to the estimated natural flow. The same is true for May through September. Once this final determination is made, we then send this data back to the water rights staff for inclusion in the initial review determination. Next slide. When an initial review is issued, the final step in this process on our end is to include this water right into the water availability system, which then protects that water from being allocated for any other junior water right. Next slide. In closing, our take-home messages are that surface water staff at the agency are the experts in hydrology with many years of education and professional experience. The water availability program was developed and based on statute and rule, and that the science applied was based on best available data and industry standard hydrologic methodologies. Next slide. Thank you, and any questions may be sent to the email address listed here.